So, do you know the Ten Commandments? If you do you understand the Ten Commandments? If you do you practice the Ten Commandments? Put differently, do you measure your thinking, your talking, your doing, its rightness by the standard of the Ten Commandments? Or have you set your own standards? You know, you are not allowed to import things into this country unless the Bureau of Standards okays them. And what do? They check the item you are importing against already a standard, a written document that says a pen must be like this. So they check whether your pen meets the minimum requirement of the standard and then allow it in or disallow it. It's going to be the same with us as Christians. If we want to live lives that are pleasing to God, we need to ensure that we carry ourselves according to the set standard. And the Ten Commandments set that standard. So you need to know it, but more importantly, you need to practice it. And the best way of practicing it is to check yourself, check the things you do, check the things you say against the standard. You know, the first four are talking about heaven and God. Do you take the name of the Lord in vain? And to be important that you check whether the way you mention God's name, the way you act, and yet you claim to be a Christian, brings disrepute to God. Then you are falling below the standard. The tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. You know, in fact, I'm sure anybody would have wanted to see them, but you know, only the chief high priest was allowed where the ark was. And even then, only one day, in the Day of Atonement. And even then, he went there with a barrel and a string tied, so that if he died there, he would be pulled out. It was called Most Holy, not just holy, but most holy, where the commandments are. Of course, to see a tablet not written by human hands, written by the finger of God, that would be something. But you know, they're actually written in the book of Exodus chapter 20. All the 10 commandments are there. And in my own suggestion, we need to keep referring back to them. If there are things you place in your house, maybe that's one of the things you should place in your house. You know, the Deuteronomy chapter 6, we are told that we should have God's word all around us, so the children, as they grow, will see it. Sometimes you are told to place it on your clothes, sometimes on your face, sometimes on your doors. I think the commandment would qualify to be like that, where you have them. Why do you need them? Not just so that you memorize, although you must, but so that you keep checking your life. You know, Jesus summarized them as loving others as you love yourself. So whatever it is you are doing, you need to be able to ask, as you look at the 10 Commandments, is this really loving? So, then the 10 Commandments could be regarded as a mold, the mold they use in factories, so that all items that come out will be similar, because they are made from the mold that sets the form, sets the look for the item you want to produce. We are supposed to be producing things according to this mode of the 10 Commandments. That's why we are supposed to set one day out of 7 in order to worship, in order to rest. And even if you have a very busy program, You just have to allow your staff a free day when they can go to worship. If they refuse to worship, it's not because you have stopped them. And you yourself need to set a day when you rest and worship. All these are requirements. That's why you need to be careful that you do not have in your possession anything which you are neither given nor did you buy with your own sweat. Because if you have it, then you are a thief and you're operating outside the standard. That's why to you, there are no white lies and black lies. All lies are lies. Because the Ten Commandments set a very high standard. It says simply, without a very long, complicated sentence, thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness. So in all these things, they are set as standards that we are to follow. And we need to measure the way we carry our lives. If it was important enough for the finger of God to write it, it's important enough for us to follow it. However, we need to understand that we are saved by grace through faith, not our works, lest any man should boast. That's Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. And that's the New Testament belief. We don't obey the Ten Commandments so that we are saved. We obey the Ten Commandments because we are saved. Even if you obey the Ten Commandments, you have fallen short of the glory of God. We are saved when we come to God and seek His forgiveness, admit our inadequacy, admit our sinfulness. We are forgiven. Christ becomes the Lord of our lives. That's how we are saved. And because we are now saved, we want to please the Lord. That's why we now obey the Ten Commandments. Let me repeat. We are not saved because we obey the Ten Commandments. We obey the Ten Commandments because we are saved. You cannot claim to be born again, yet you are living a life that is not consistent with the Ten Commandments. You cannot claim to have Christ in your life, yet you are contradicting what God wrote as the standard for the way we live, as it relates to how we relate with Him and how we relate with one another. So I repeat, do not think because you are keeping the Ten Commandments that you will go to heaven. The standard is higher than that. Only Christ, who was God-man, was able to keep the standard, so died on the cross, produced righteous blood, which if when you come to Him, the Lord, it pays the penalty for your sin, and you are therefore forgiven. So, we have to take the 2 tablets of the covenant law. That's what we call the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, and practice it. But not so that we get saved, but because we are saved. And I am suggesting that once in a while, please look through them. But on a continuous basis, please measure yourself with them. Exodus 31 verse 18 said, when the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, He gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God. Why does God write it down? Are we not grateful it was written down? Have you ever tried the game where you whisper something to one person, then that one whispers that one? By the 10th person, when you tell the 10th person to say what you said, it's totally different. And they're not lying. That's what they heard. But when it is written, it remains the same. Are we not grateful to God that He left us the written word, so that those who lived in the 16th century and those who are living in the 21st century, we all depend on the same written commandments. So we are able to live in righteousness and glorify God with the same standard. We have no excuse not to live holy lives, just like those who came to bring the word to Africa. We have the same standard. May the Lord help us in thankfulness to his written word. Number one, to read it. Number two, to believe it. Number three, to practice it. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, we read, when the people saw that Moses was long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. What an abomination. What caused people in less than 40 days of Moses being up the mountain to forget the 10 commandments that had just been given, and all of a sudden forget that the first one said, you shall not have any other gods, and ask Aaron, who was a participant in giving the commandments in the first place, to actually make other gods, exactly against the first of the 10 commandments. What could actually make people backslide so quickly and so thoroughly? Sometimes you look at them and wonder, what was wrong with the Israelites? Surely, if they have seen the mountain shaking, the voice of God directly, him telling them what to do, if they have seen the miracle of the pillar of fire in the night and the cloud in the day, leading them, how could they all of a sudden turn against the same God just because their leader is away for less than 40 days? And maybe we should be more interested in ourselves. Think about the last time when you displeased the Lord. What made you give in to the voice of the evil one and do what did not please God? So the verse is saying, Exodus 32 verse 1 is saying, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So we ask ourselves this week, what really leads to this level of backsliding? This level of denying the God who has been so good to us? For the Israelites, it was not most of them, all of them, I think, could remember the crossing of the Red Sea. They could remember the great rescue out of a superpower. And that God directly, not them, they never shot an arrow. It's the one who actually defeated the armies of Pharaoh to get them out. Not too long before this particular time. And they could remember how they crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, while the Egyptian armies were completely destroyed. They could remember a God that was personal with them, going before them, leading them on a daily basis. They could remember a God who talked with Moses directly. Yes, they could remember the God of Sinai Mountain talking to them directly and telling them that they have to be his people. And yet, here they are saying, let's forget him. Let's forget that God of Moses. Let's forget Moses. Make us gods that can go before us. So what makes people behave the way the Egyptians behaved in asking Aaron to make gods? I suggest 3 things may have happened to these people. Number 1, instead of seeing God, they were seeing Moses, despite all the effort of Moses, pointing them to God. They saw the God of Moses, not our God, but the God of Moses. And so if Moses disappears up a mountain, and 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, he's not coming back, they no longer trust that God. And that is a big, big possibility. That if what you have is trust in your spiritual leader, in your spiritual father, so they are called, and not directly to God himself, who might use or not use any human being to reach you. You risk yourself one of these days backsliding so thoroughly, you will not imagine you are the same guy who has been preaching to us. And I think that's something all of us who preach, all of us who disciple others, all of us who are spiritual leaders need to watch out. Are you pointing people to yourself? Do they trust the God of the pastor? Or do they trust God directly, not through a man? Because if they are trusting God through you, all you need is to say something wrong, backslide yourself, and they themselves will be backslidden. Point them to God directly. In Exodus chapter 32 verse 1, we read, when the people saw that Moses was long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. What an abomination. What caused people in less than 40 days of Moses being up the mountain to forget the 10 commandments that had just been given, and all of a sudden forget that the first one said, you shall not have any other gods, and ask Aaron, who was a participant in giving the commandments in the first place, to actually make other gods, exactly against the first of the 10 commandments. What could actually make people backslide so quickly and so thoroughly? Sometimes we look at them and wonder, what was wrong with the Israelites? Surely if they have seen the mountain shaking, the voice of God directly, him telling them what to do, if they have seen the miracle of the pillar of fire in the night and the cloud in the day, leading them, how could they all of a sudden turn against the same God just because their leader is away for less than 40 days? And maybe we should be more interested in ourselves. Think about the last time when you displeased the Lord. What made you give in to the voice of the evil one and do what did not please God? So the first thing that could have caused them to backslide is the fact that they never actually trusted God directly. They trusted the God of Moses. And the same thing with us when we trust not God directly, but our pastors or our spiritual leaders or the person who led us to Christ. And because he is human, something will happen to him. He will even die, he will get sick, he will be rude to you. Your faith will be in jeopardy. So we are learning that if you really want to help people, you must help them to trust in God, hear him, obey him, and not through another. The New Testament tells us there is only one mediator between God and man, and that is Jesus Christ. So nobody, no pastor, pope, or bishop, or prophet, or apostle is allowed to be a mediator between you and God. That whenever you have a problem, you have to run to a pastor. Whenever you have a problem, you have to run to somebody that you cannot talk to God directly. And at the time of Corona, when we are not allowed to have meetings in church, your faith goes down. I think you need to ask yourself clearly, do you talk to God directly? Or ask in a different way, do you lead people to God or do you lead them to yourself? Are they answerable to you or are they answerable to God? I know we have this accountability issue and we're almost making it look like we are accountable to human beings. This may not be that's everywhere. And then they themselves have a sell by date. We need to be accountable directly to God, even if we also have other accountabilities.